Hi folks, Paul here from Canada. Wow, what a game. Came home Friday after work. I'm in Canada, obviously the West Coast, so the game was played at lunchtime our time. My wife gave me one of those looks which basically let me know that after a hard week of work, that probably the worst thing I could do was to switch that game on, which I'd recorded, and watch it. So I watched it the next day. Ouch. Of course, I wasn't surprised, given, the fact that I knew the result and the crap that we've seen this season. Really, it's not that shocking. So today's Your Shout from me is basically a plea. And it's a plea for the owners to do what they know they have to do. I'm not going to pretend that this is off the cuff. I have written out 2.5 pages of diatribe in order to persuade them and to get others on board with the fact that we need to do something. Because our board are not or seem incapable of taking a decision. I wouldn't be so concerned if this hadn't happened before. So enough said, I'm just basically going to read off what I've written here and hope that it has, along with the collective other West Ham fans out there, and Gio and Gonzo and everybody else at the channel that they have there, has some impact soon. Here we go. So the owners have sidestepped making the big decision yet again, just like they did with Avram Grant a few years back. Bilic, 5 games ago, and again now, has another stay of execution. He has 2 games to prove he can turn West Ham's fortunes around. I can't believe the lengths this board will go to avoid making the big decision. I have the feeling that if Brady was in sole charge, a la Dragon's Den or whatever the TV show she has over there, he would be gone, because she makes those sorts of decisions. But Gold and Sullivan, they seem incapable of taking the bull by the horns. They're just perseverating. I can understand the reluctance to do this with no replacement lined up. But frankly, that's an absurd situation for us to be in. Only 5 or 6 games ago, they supposedly gave Slav 4 games to turn it round. And while, with a lot of luck and a following wind and some miraculous play by fringe players not in Slav's plans, Masuaku and Sacco, he unemphatically crawled over the line and met their deadline. But what were the board doing during that time? Surely they were lining up potential candidates. Apparently not, because they have now waffled again and given a meaningless deadline for Bilic to reverse our decision. Of course, they've painted themselves into a corner. Prior to the game, they gave that very public interview that stated that whatever the Brighton result was, Slaven would be able to see his contract out. Do they ever learn? So the way I see it today, my job is to convince the board that they must find a replacement, even if in the short term it's Terry Wesley, who, I might add, has done an admirable job with the under-23s. Leicester did this last year. And while he overstayed his welcome and was sacked a week ago, his impact after Ranieri's sacking was immediate. So here, briefly, are my list of reasons and rationale for sacking Bilic. 1. Slaven Bilic's decision-making. Let's just talk about the last 2 games. I know I'd prefer not to, but we have to face facts. So Burnley and Brighton. Against Burnley, when we were down to 10 man, 70 minutes, I watched Antonio unable to continue tracking back and press Burnley's midfield. Now, Antonio is a wonderful player, but given his recent groin strain and the fact the his game hinges on lung-bursting runs, it's crucial that your attacking players press high and interfere with the development of any potential play that can catch you out when you're down to 10 men. At half-time, surely there was some sort of contingency plan to make sure the forwards or attacking midfielders kept the pressure on the opposition and kept them in their own half. And surely there was that contingency plan to replace any of those players who started a flag. Apparently not, as Antonio was left to wilt and wander for the remaining 24 minutes of that game. If I could see this 5,000 miles away through a screen in my living room, why couldn't Slav and his staff? Instead, he brought on Masuaku and Saku, expecting the same thing to happen that had happened against Swansea. Really? Slav and his support team are devoid of ideas. To illustrate this, against Brighton, Slaven pushed Kayute into a forward role in order to do a job that the absent Carroll usually does for us, because we don't seem to be able to play any other way. Crosses weren't working. Brighton's defence had been well coached on stopping wingers and nullifying any crosses that did make it. But Slav didn't see that. He continued with the same tactics despite the obvious ability of the Brighton defenders to cope with all of our crosses. I'll be generous here. My second point is this. Our players are either unfit or not willing to play for Bilic. Potentially, both are true. Over the past 2 weeks, there have been 2 social media posts by players on our team clearly stating that Bilic has lost the dressing room. Against Burnley, there was the shot of our 3 Spanish-speaking players, Lanzini, Hernandez and Adrian, having either not played, Adrian, or being subbed, and they were shaking their heads and speaking to each other in Spanish. Now, I'm not a Spanish speaker. What they were saying, I don't know, but the general appearance was one of disbelief and genuine negativity. In Adrian's case, it's perhaps easier to understand, but given that Lanzini and Hernandez are big players for us and getting starts every week, that is worrying. It's conjecture on my part, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were baffled with Slavin's tactics and substitutions. I don't usually watch other teams, but given the horrendous tedium bar the Spurs game this season and the appalling result against Brighton, I decided to do some research before I posted this. I watched a recorded game of Watford versus Arsenal played the previous weekend. Watford looked so fast, fit and eager to play, I was genuinely perplexed. With the exception of perhaps Richarlison, I don't think any of their players, in my honest opinion, would get into our team. So how is it they can come down from a 1-goal deficit to win against Arsenal? In its belief, its tactics, its fitness and its coaching. It must be, because they don't have the players on paper that we have. They respect their manager, Silva, and they play for him. To a man, they played at full tilt boogie the whole game. None of this easing off and inviting pressure at the end. In fact, quite the opposite. The substitutions made by Marco Silva were game-changing. He noticed that Mariappa, Pereira and Gray were tired, again, given the up-tempo game that they were playing. He made a double substitution at 63 minutes and one in 81 minutes. It turned the game on its head. I couldn't believe the way they were playing. Cohesive, fast, one-touch triangles, lung-bursting runs, every player covering each other, forwards harassing Arsenal's back four and scoring in the 90th minute. And that was Watford. Just who are we going to beat this season if it isn't the Burnleys, the Brightons, the Watfords, the Newcastles, the Southamptons? I don't get it. Just where are our points going to come from, Mr. Sullivan? My third point, Slavin's inability to man-manage and get the best out of our players. There was a Your Shout segment last week where I think it was Chaz, I believe, made a very good point. There have been a litany of players who have come to West Ham and consistently underperformed, starting with our current team. We'd have to say Hernandez hasn't turned it on, really. Arnautovic, definitely not. Ayew, he's underwhelming. He has done a few things for us, but he's underwhelming. Snodgrass, Zaza, Faguli, Nordveit, Kelleri, and some might even say Cresswell and Antonio lately. This is quite a list. And it's not made better by the fact that Zaza, who is scoring goals for fun in Spain right now, Nordveit and Snodgrass have all come out and criticised Slavin's decisions, his interpersonal contact with him, and his training and fitness regimen. This is the man who lost Payet, don't forget. I don't think we can blame it all on Bilic, but I have a feeling that if that had been one of a number of other coaches, he might still be with us. And this last point is what I believe produces the plodding, indecisive, unimaginative, predictable, ineffective team play we see on the pitch week in and week out. Our players are unable to change tactics. They're unable to adapt to new situations or challenges. They are unable to process and play quickly. They're unable to play one-touch, quick passing and move off the ball football that is the West Ham way. Why? Because they don't know what's expected of them. They're unable to play freely in their best positions and to be creative. They play a formulaic game based on Andy Carroll being the centre of things. I think back when Bilic was commentating, I think he had a really good relationship with our squad. I think he was one of the boys. Unfortunately, being one of the boys eventually leads to a lack of respect. I don't think there was that distance, and I think we're at that point now, where the players really don't look up to him. I don't blame the players. We can say they're paid well, and therefore they should bloody well wear the shirt with pride and play their hearts out week in and week out, but that's not how it works. We know that. That's not what motivates players. Money doesn't motivate. Managers and coaches do. Think about your own lives. You don't do a better job week in and week out because you're constantly thinking of the monetary reward. I know I don't. Half the time I forget I'm being paid. It's the people you work with, the atmosphere and the camaraderie that gets you motivated. Your employer gets better results if you want to be there. Money is a very small part of the equation in the big scheme of things. Players are paid well, but they're all paid well. It's a level playing field for them. Their world is different than ours, but it's the same in some ways too. Money will only motivate so far. After that, it's wanting to work, wanting to win, wanting to do their best that counts. The money isn't an issue until the next contract negotiations for players. Before the game, Hammer's co-owner David Sullivan had said you should honour a contract with an employee unless things were desperate. Well, I put it to you, Mr. Sullivan and the rest of the board, that with 8 points after games with Southampton, Newcastle, Huddersfield, West Brom, Swansea, Burnley, Brighton, and given the fabulous players on paper that we have, the apathy on the field that we've seen this season, things are indeed, Mr. Sullivan, desperate. Please, the sooner the better, sir. Come on, you Irons. I'm hoping that what I heard today, 2 more games, is just a smokescreen, and that behind the scenes, these guys are thinking seriously about changing Slaven. I'm sorry, I like Slaven, but he has to go, and he has to go soon. I know Everton are having the same conversation, and we're going to be after the same targets. Can we be just a little more proactive, please? Come on, you Irons again. Hopefully, this week's game against Spurs in the Carabao Cup, and then next weekend against Crystal Palace, will show us some good results. I never want us to lose. But given this 2-game deadline, perhaps it wouldn't be the worst thing. Short-term pain for long-term gain. Because otherwise, we're going down. Cheers.